Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be taking a look at Atomic Habits by James Clear. And we're really going to try to give you some takeaways on how to build some positive habits,
Yeah.
especially if you're looking for simple changes you can implement in your everyday life.
Yeah. And the thing I love about Clear's approach is that it's all about these tiny 1% improvements. They might seem insignificant on their own, but they actually can lead to huge results over time.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about this whole concept of atomic habits, right?
Mm.
It's like these small little atoms that end up coming together to create something much bigger. And, today we're really going to be focusing on his 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Exactly. Those laws are kind of like a framework for you to make your habits stick, like a recipe for success.
Yeah.
And we're going to be breaking down each ingredient.
Okay, so let's start with that first law, make it obvious.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, we are creatures of habit, but sometimes we just need a little nudge or a little reminder to get going.
Yeah, that's where being intentional really comes into play. And Clear suggests using something called implementation intentions, which is basically you're deciding exactly when and where you're going to perform the habit you want to. So you're taking out the guesswork.
So instead of just saying, oh, I want to exercise more, we're going to say, every morning after I make my coffee, I'm going to do 10 push-ups. You take away that debate in your head, should I or shouldn't I?
Yeah, you're setting up a cue for your brain. You're removing that initial hurdle of deciding when and where you're going to do something. So it makes it much easier to actually start.
And I imagine this applies to all sorts of habits, not just fitness-related ones.
Absolutely. Think about your work life. Let's say you want to be more focused in the mornings. You could set an implementation intention like, as soon as I sit down at my desk, I will spend 5 minutes planning out my day.
So instead of jumping right into your email and getting sidetracked, you're starting with intention. Okay, so now we've made it obvious. Let's move on to make it attractive. This one sounds intriguing.
This is where we really start tapping into our brain's reward system. We are more likely to stick with habits that we actually enjoy that offer us some sort of immediate satisfaction.
This reminds me of Claire's concept of temptation bundling. So think about it this way. Is there something you love to do? Something you already look forward to?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's listening to your favorite podcast or catching up on a TV show you like while you're cooking dinner. The idea is to link this already enjoyable activity to the habit you're trying to build.
Exactly.
So let's say you want to start reading more, but you always find yourself just scrolling through social media instead. So you could bundle those two by saying, okay, I'm really allowed to scroll through my favorite social media app while I'm reading a book.
Exactly. You're associating that thing you already enjoy with the habit you're trying to develop, so you're making it that much more appealing.
It's almost like tricking your brain into looking forward to that new habit. Okay, so we've made it obvious, we've made it attractive. Now, how do we make it easy?
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, we all want those quick wins.
This is where the famous 2-minute rule comes into play. Think about a habit you've been wanting to start, but it feels a bit daunting.
Like finally cleaning out that closet that's overflowing, or
Yeah.
writing that novel that's been in the back of your mind.
Exactly. Those are great goals to have, but they can feel really overwhelming. The 2-minute rule is all about breaking down these big goals into tiny, manageable steps. So instead of cleaning out your entire closet, you could just start with organizing one shelf. Or instead of writing a whole chapter, you could commit to just writing for 5 minutes.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
all about just taking that small first step. And I imagine that once you get started, you're more likely to keep going.
That's the magic of it. By making that initial step so easy, you're removing the barrier to resistance. You're building momentum. And before you know it, those 2 minutes can turn into 20 minutes or an hour.
So it's not about instant perfection. It's about getting started and building consistency over time.
That's the key takeaway.
Speaking of consistency, that brings us to law number 4. Make it satisfying. So tell me about this one.
This one is all about rewarding ourselves for our efforts. Our brains thrive on those little bursts of dopamine, that feel-good chemical that tells us we're doing something right.
So how do we incorporate that feeling of reward into our habit building journey?
There are a few simple ways to do this. I think visual progress can be super motivating. So using a habit tracker, whether it's an app or just a simple checklist, can be really powerful because you get that satisfaction of checking things off as you go.
I love checking things off my list.
Me too. It feels so good.
What are some other ways to make habits satisfying?
Think about small rewards that you can tie to your new habit. Like maybe it's enjoying a cup of your favorite tea after a really productive work session, or listening to an uplifting playlist while you work out. It's really just about finding those little things that make you feel good and associating them with the habit you're trying to build.
So we're kind of like hacking our own reward system.
Exactly.
And the more satisfying we make these habits, the more likely we are to stick with them in the long run. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground just with these first 4 laws of atomic habits. But before we move on, I want to ask you something. We've talked about making habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. But what about those times when we hit a snag? Life happens, motivation dips, and those best-laid plans kind of fall apart. So what do we do then?
That's a great question, and it's something that Clear actually addresses in Atomic Habits. Building these sustainable habits isn't about being perfect. It's about having a system that can adapt to those inevitable ups and downs.
So it's less about willpower and more about creating a system that almost like runs on autopilot.
Think of it this way. If you rely solely on motivation, you're setting yourself up for this roller coaster ride. Some days you'll be super pumped. Other days you'll just be like, ugh, I don't want to do this. But a well-designed system helps you stay on track even when that motivation takes a dip.
That makes sense. So what are some key strategies for creating that kind of resilient system?
Well, one of the most powerful techniques that Clear highlights is this idea of habit stacking. It's such a simple concept, but it's incredibly effective. It's all about building new habits by linking them to existing ones.
That takes me back to that example of drinking water after you brush your teeth. You're already doing something consistently, so you just like piggyback a new habit onto that existing routine.
Exactly. You're leveraging those automatic behaviors that we already do without even thinking about it. Like, for example, let's say you want to start meditating every morning. Instead of trying to create this whole new routine from scratch, you could just add like a 5-minute meditation to your existing morning coffee ritual.
Okay, I like that because that just like flows right into your day. It's almost like you're not even creating a new habit. You're just adding on to something that's already there.
Exactly. And the possibilities are really endless with this. Like, let's say you want to start expressing gratitude more often. You could stack that habit by writing down like 3 things you're grateful for before you go to bed every night.
I love that. These are such simple ideas, but they're so brilliant.
Yeah, and it makes habit building feel so much more approachable, right?
For sure.
That's what's so great about Clear's approach. He really emphasizes these small, manageable steps that actually add up to big changes over time.
And speaking of keeping track of those changes,
Yeah.
let's talk about habit tracking. I'm a very visual person, so I personally love seeing my progress laid out in front of me.
Yeah, habit tracking is a fantastic way to stay motivated and to really hold yourself accountable. It's like a visual reminder of your commitment to these new habits.
It's almost like a game, right? You get to see those little wins add up, and it
Yeah.
kind of keeps you going.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can use a simple notebook, a calendar. There's so many habit tracking apps out there now. The key is just to find a system that works for you and stick with it.
And what about those times when, despite our best efforts, we slip up? I think we all have those moments where, we miss a day or we fall back into those old patterns.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that setbacks are a normal part of the process. It's not about being perfect. It's about learning from those slips and just getting back on track.
That's about having self-compassion.
Yes, exactly. Beating yourself up over a missed day or, a small slip up is only going to make it harder to get back on track. This is a journey, not a race. It's about progress, not perfection.
Such an important reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in that all-or-nothing mentality,
Yeah.
and that can really sabotage our efforts in the long run.
Exactly. Flexibility is key when it comes to building sustainable habits. Life throws curveballs, and you have to have a system that's able to adapt.
And this kind of leads into another key concept from Atomic Habits that I find really fascinating, and that's this idea of identity-based habits. So what is that all about?
This is where things get really interesting. Clear argues that lasting change really starts with shifting your identity. It's about aligning your actions with the person you want to become.
So it's not just about setting goals or changing behaviors. It's about fundamentally changing how you see yourself.
Exactly. It's about embodying the identity of someone who already has those habits that you're trying to build. So, for example, instead of saying, I want to be a writer, you start thinking and acting like a writer.
And how does that translate into like practical action?
Think about those small, everyday choices you make. So if you identify as a writer, you might find yourself carrying a notebook everywhere you go, jotting down ideas. You're observing the world through a writer's lens. You're not just trying to write, you're being a writer.
That's such a powerful shift in mindset. And it's almost like Those small actions then start to reinforce that identity you're trying to cultivate.
That's the idea. It's about creating that self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you act in alignment with your desired identity, the more that identity becomes ingrained in who you are.
This is so insightful. It feels like we're moving beyond just simple habit formation. It's almost like we're delving into this realm of like personal transformation.
And that's what's so exciting about Atomic Habits. It's not just a guide to productivity, it's a framework for becoming the best version of yourself.
Now, before we wrap up this incredible deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. Just a question to spark their own reflections on how they can apply these powerful ideas to their own lives. Think about like a goal you're currently working towards, or maybe something you've been putting off because it feels a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
It could be anything, right?
Yeah.
Starting a new fitness routine, writing that blog post you've been thinking about, or even just like being more present with your family. Now, here's the challenge. Instead of just focusing on the outcome, how can you apply this idea of identity-based habits to that goal? How would you think act and approach your day differently if you already embody the identity of someone who achieves that goal?
Such a powerful question to consider. Like, let's say your goal is to be more organized. Instead of just thinking, oh, I need to get organized, you start seeing yourself as an organized person. Like, what would an organized person do? How would they manage their time, their space, their commitments?
I like that. It's almost like you're stepping into the role of your future self.
Exactly. And the beauty is that those small everyday actions actually start to reinforce that identity. You're not just trying to be organized. You're living it, breathing it, being it.
This has been such an incredible deep dive into Atomic Habits. We explored the power of those tiny 1% improvements, those 4 laws of behavior change, and then this transformative potential of identity-based habits.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you, and I really hope that our listeners are feeling inspired to start building those atomic habits into their own lives.
Yes, and remember, it's not about overnight success. It's about those small, consistent actions that add up over time.
Exactly like James Clear says, success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
So true. To all our listeners out there, we encourage you to pick up a copy of Atomic Habits and just start putting these ideas into practice. You might be amazed by the incredible changes that these small atomic habits can create in your life.
And remember, we're all on this journey together. Every step, no matter how small it is, brings you closer to becoming the best version of yourself.
That's it for our deep dive into Atomic Habits. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
Thanks for tuning into Chapter 2, where we break down the best books to fuel your growth and learning. If this book caught your interest, check out the links in the description to get the audiobook at no cost. Don't miss out and support our channel while you dive deeper into these life-changing reads. See you in the next episode.